What if I told you that there are old accounts of a supposed diamond mine in Canada that simply disappeared from the records, and that to this day no one has been able to prove whether it was real or just a historical error? Have you ever stopped to think about how many stories have been erased from collective memory simply because someone, somewhere, decided they shouldn't be told? Well, that's exactly what happened to one of the most disturbing legends of the Yukon Territory, a region that was once the scene of boundless ambitions, lost fortunes, and secrets buried under layers of ice and silence. During the most chaotic period of the gold rush at the end of the 19th century, while thousands of prospectors traversed brutal landscapes in search of riches, something far more valuable was supposedly discovered in those frozen lands. Persistent stories speak of a diamond mine so rich it could have completely changed the economic destiny of an entire region. But instead of glory and prosperity, what followed was a series of inexplicable events that transformed this discovery into one of the most controversial mysteries of northern Canada. This story involves unchecked ambition, sudden disappearances, contradictory documents that appear and disappear like ghosts, and a secret that some believe was buried along with the mine itself. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may make you question everything you thought you knew about how the official story is constructed. We're not talking about cheap conspiracy theories or baseless urban legends. We're talking about real records, documented testimonies, and coincidences too suspicious to ignore. The Yukon has always been a land of contradictions. While promising unimaginable riches, it also hid deadly dangers around every bend of frozen river, in every snowstorm that could last for days. The men who dared to challenge that territory knew they were gambling with their lives. But what they didn't know is that some discoveries attract not only fortune, but also the dangerous gaze of those who prefer that certain treasures never be found. In the next few minutes, you'll discover one of the most intriguing legends of northern Canada, one that history books prefer not to mention and that locals still whisper in hushed tones on cold nights. You'll delve into a narrative that blends proven facts with inexplicable gaps, where each answer generates 3 new questions. And in the end, you'll decide for yourself whether this story hides a deliberately forgotten truth, or if it's just a myth, fueled by human desperation and boundless greed. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever heard of something so big, so important, that simply vanished without leaving any official trace? That's exactly the feeling that overwhelms anyone who starts investigating this story. Because the more you search, the more the pieces don't seem to fit together perfectly. Documents appear and disappear. Witnesses change their stories. Locations become too vague to be reliable. It's as if someone erased an entire chapter of history with a giant eraser and hoped that no one would notice the empty space left behind. But before understanding why this story disappeared from official records, why it became a whisper instead of a cry of discovery, you need to know how it all began. You need to go back in time and understand the context of those chaotic days, when desperate men crossed frozen mountains chasing dreams that often turned into nightmares. Because it was in this scenario of chaos, ambition, and extreme survival that something extraordinary would have been discovered. We are at the end of the 19th century, between 1896 and 1900, at the height of the Klondike Gold Rush. The Yukon Territory was a brutal place, almost impossible to imagine today. We are talking about absolute isolation, temperatures that reached 40 degrees below zero, men living in makeshift tents without reliable communication with the rest of the world. It was a scenario where hope and despair walked side by side, where every decision could mean the difference between fortune and death, frozen in the mountains. It was in this chaotic context that unsettling reports began to emerge. Prospectors digging for gold claimed to have found unusual stones with a shine unlike anything they had ever seen before. Some believed they were looking at rough diamonds hidden among the icy rocks of northern Canada. Others thought they might just be common minerals, perhaps quartz. Confused by extreme exhaustion, the biting cold, and the unbridled obsession with fortune. But the hidden truth behind these reports is that no one was absolutely certain. There were no geologists nearby, no laboratories, no way to confirm anything with precision. What existed was the word of desperate men and the instantaneous transformation that this possibility brought to their lives. Just imagine the impact this had on the mindset of those prospectors. They had come from far away, crossing dangerous mountains, surviving inhumane conditions, all betting that gold would be their salvation. And suddenly, the possibility of something far more valuable arises. Diamonds would be worth an unparalleled fortune at the time. It was as if the universe was offering a second chance, an even greater reward for those who had already risked everything. Even without scientific proof, even without guarantees, the mere idea that those stones could be diamonds was enough to completely change the destiny of those men. It was the difference between returning home empty-handed or becoming immensely rich. But this is where the journey of this story takes an unexpected turn. These accounts, these discoveries whispered among the icy camps, began to attract unwanted attention. Outsiders, investors, speculators, even representatives of the colonial government began to show interest. And it was precisely at this moment that the story began to strangely fragment. Documents that supposedly recorded the exact location of these discoveries simply disappeared. Witnesses who had spoken openly about the stones suddenly fell silent. Some prospectors who insisted on publicizing their discoveries left for other regions without explanation, or in darker cases, were never seen again. What really happened behind the scenes of this story? Why did information that should have been preserved in official archives simply disappear? These are questions that still intrigue historians and enthusiasts of unsolved mysteries in Canada. Because, you see, if it were just an unfounded legend, why would so many records have been erased? Why so much effort to silence something that, theoretically, never existed? It is as if someone made very deliberate decisions to ensure that this story would never be fully told. And when you start connecting the dots, you realize that there are much deeper revelations hidden beneath the surface of this frozen narrative. Comment below. Something was hidden if you also think there is truth behind this whole story. But what truly makes this story so disturbing is the void it left behind. Because, look, when you start searching for concrete evidence, for official documents proving the existence of this diamond mine in the Yukon, you're met with a deafening silence. There are no government records confirming this discovery. There are no detailed maps pointing to the exact location. There are no filed mining licenses, nor official geological reports validating these findings. It's as if the whole story happened in the shadows, beyond the reach of the colonial bureaucracy that normally documented every inch of land explored during that period. The maps of the time are incomplete, full of contradictions and inexplicable gaps. Entire regions appear marked imprecisely, with vague annotations or simply blank. And this was not uncommon, of course, because we are talking about a vast, unexplored, and extremely hostile territory. But what is striking is that precisely the areas where these stones were supposedly found seem to have been deliberately ignored in later cartographic records. Newspapers of the time mentioned rumors, yes, scattered articles talking about mysterious discoveries, about prospectors who claimed to have found something extraordinary. But none of these articles presented solid evidence, photographs of the stones, or detailed interviews with reliable witnesses. Historians who study this period point out that many documents from the gold rush were indeed lost over time. Fires destroyed entire archives. Administrative changes caused chaotic transfers of records between different government agencies. And simple negligence led to important papers being discarded or forgotten in dusty basements. So, technically, the absence of documents doesn't necessarily prove that something was intentionally hidden. It could simply be the result of decades of carelessness and unfortunate circumstances. But it is precisely this explanation that raises even more questions. Because the hidden truth here is that some absences seem too specific to be mere coincidence. Some people believe that very powerful economic interests may have discouraged further investigations into these findings. The logic behind this theory is relatively simple. If there really were diamonds in the Yukon, it would represent a direct threat to mining monopolies already established in other parts of the world. Giant companies that controlled the gemstone market would have much to lose if Canada suddenly became a new diamond mining hub. Behind the scenes, decisions may have been made to ensure that this information did not gain public traction, attract massive investment, or significant government attention. But this is a theory, not a proven fact. Others defend a completely different interpretation. For this group, it was all just a misinterpretation amplified by the chaos and desperate mentality of the time. Exhausted, freezing men, hungry for success, could easily have mistaken common minerals for diamonds. The psychological transformation caused by extreme isolation and the obsession with wealth could have distorted their perception of reality. And when these accounts began to circulate, they took on a life of their own, growing with each retelling, embellished by those who wanted to believe that something extraordinary had happened in those frozen lands. The concrete fact is that the story was never officially clarified. There was no definitive investigation that completely proved or disproved the existence of this mine. There is no final report that closes the case with unquestionable authority. And this raises an absolutely unsettling question. Why has this account never completely disappeared? Why, more than a century later, are there still people fascinated by this story? Still those who believe that something very real was hidden under layers of time and silence. Revelations like these do not persist for generations without some kind of foundation, without some spark of truth that continues to burn even when everything around it should have turned to ashes. Right below, the truth is out there. If you feel there's more to this story than what we've been told, and if you've stayed with me this far, you've already realized that this isn't just another video about lost treasures. This is a story that touches on something bigger, on that inner curiosity we all have about mysteries that no one has been able to solve. And look, if this topic resonates with you, if you're also one of those intrigued by these forgotten Canadian legends, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Do you believe this mine really existed? Or do you think it's just another story created by the gold rush? I read all the comments and I love knowing what you think, because every opinion below builds this community of people fascinated by the real mysteries that history has tried to erase. And if you're enjoying this journey, click the like button below. It may seem like a small gesture, but it's what shows the algorithm that this type of content is worthwhile, that there are people genuinely interested in uncovering the darkest and most haunted secrets of Canada. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who are also obsessed with abandoned places, ghost towns, and stories that have been silenced. And if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe now and activate the bell, because every week I bring you a new Canadian mystery that will send shivers down your spine. You won't want to miss the next one. Now, returning to our story frozen in the lands of the Yukon. The Yukon region today is a silent testament to all that happened during those chaotic years. When you look at those remote lands, covered in snow for most of the year, it's hard to imagine that one day it was the epicenter of a frenzy that moved thousands of people. Ancient mining structures still resist the passage of time, like wooden and metal skeletons that refuse to disappear completely. Rusty equipment, tracks that lead nowhere, huts slowly crumbling under the weight of harsh winters. All this makes up a landscape that seems frozen not only by the climate, but by memory itself. The silence in these areas is something that needs to be experienced to be understood. It's not just the absence of sound, it's a kind of stillness that seems to carry weight, as if the air were dense with untold stories. The wind cuts like a blade, piercing any clothing, any protection, and it's easy to understand why these landscapes have fueled dark stories over the decades. There's something in the icy vastness, in the absolute solitude of these places, that stirs human perception. The transformation these lands have undergone over time is visible in every abandoned structure, in every tool left behind, as if the objects themselves held memories of those who used them. Modern explorers and adventurers venturing into these regions bring back accounts that, while never scientifically proven, are repeated with disturbing consistency. Sensations of constant surveillance, the impression that something or someone is watching every move, an oppressive presence that seems to intensify the deeper you go into the abandoned mining areas. Obviously, science can explain some of this through environmental factors, extreme isolation, sensory deprivation caused by absolute silence. But these accounts continue to circulate among those who know the region well, passed down by word of mouth as unofficial warnings. Over time, the true stories about the supposed diamond mine have blended into local folklore in an almost indistinguishable way. Legends about the spirits of prospectors who wander eternally, protecting secrets they took to the grave. Narratives about cursed riches that bring only misfortune to those who dare to seek them. Tales of voices echoing on windless nights, calling out the names of people who disappeared more than a century ago. Hidden truth and popular imagination intertwine in such a way that separating one from the other becomes an almost impossible task. This is not a characteristic unique to the Yukon. Canada is full of abandoned places that carry the weight of broken promises, collapsed ambitions, and lives consumed by impossible dreams. Abandoned psychiatric hospitals where brutal treatments were carried out. Luxury hotels that witnessed tragedies and now decay in silence. Entire villages that simply ceased to exist when resources ran out. Each of these places shares something in common. They represent moments in history where human decisions led to consequences that no one fully foresaw. The impact of these stories goes beyond a fascination with the macabre or the mysterious. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about how greed can completely blind common sense, about how power systems can manipulate entire narratives. The behind-the-scenes story of this particular Yukon tale reveals patterns that repeat themselves in different contexts throughout history. There are always those who discover something valuable. There are always those who want to control that discovery. And there are almost always those who simply disappear when they become too inconvenient. The journey of anyone attempting to investigate this story inevitably runs into the same obstacles. Missing documents, conflicting testimonies, locations that don't match the descriptions. And the more you search, the more you realize that perhaps this ambiguity isn't accidental. Perhaps it's exactly how someone planned it. Because the best way to hide something isn't by completely denying its existence, but by creating so many contradictory versions that the truth becomes impossible to discern. Today, those frozen lands continue to guard their secrets. The abandoned structures remain as unwitting monuments to an era of unbridled ambition. And the stories, whether based on real facts or amplified by the collective imagination, continue to be told. Because, ultimately, what fascinates us is not necessarily whether the mine actually existed or not. What captivates us is what this story reveals about ourselves, about our relationship with wealth, power, and truth. Comment below, mysteries that mess with your mind. When you stop to think about the complete trajectory of this story, what is most striking is not the specific details, but the emotional arc it follows. It begins with pure hope, that spark of discovery that makes the heart race, the possibility that something extraordinary is within reach. Then comes ambition, the race to secure control over this potential wealth. And then, abruptly, everything disappears. The records vanish, the witnesses fall silent, and what remains is only a documentary void where there should have been a clear and linear narrative. This story has survived for over a century, not because there is irrefutable proof, but precisely the opposite, because the questions have never been satisfactorily answered. There is something profoundly human about this persistence. We, as a species, have immense difficulty accepting gaps in the narrative. We want a beginning, middle, and end. We want cause and effect. We want the pieces to fit together perfectly. And when they don't fit, when there are too many empty spaces, our minds naturally begin to fill those gaps with possibilities. That's how legends that transcend generations are born. Not necessarily because they are true, but because they represent something greater than the isolated facts could represent. Perhaps this isn't really a story about a lost mine in the icy depths of the Yukon. Perhaps it's about how the human desire for wealth, for instant life transformation, for escaping the limitations of everyday reality, can create myths so powerful that they refuse to die even when all tangible evidence disappears. It's about the mindset of an entire era, where thousands abandoned everything they knew to pursue glittering promises in hostile territories. And it's about how these collective decisions shape not only individual destinies, but cultural narratives that echo for generations. The hidden truth here may be even more interesting than any elaborate conspiracy. It may simply be that those men, desperate to find something valuable, misinterpreted what they saw. That the psychological pressure of months isolated in extreme conditions distorted their perceptions. That documents were lost, not because of an orchestrated conspiracy, but simply due to the disorganization and chaos that characterized that era. Sometimes the most mundane explanation is also the most revealing about human nature. To this day, geologists and historians debate whether these accounts had any real basis, or are merely distorted echoes of an era marked by collective illusion. Some researchers point to the known geological composition of the region and argue that the existence of diamonds in significant quantities would be improbable, though not impossible. Others examine the few surviving documents and find too many inconsistencies to simply dismiss everything as fraud or fantasy. The impact of this ambiguity is fascinating because it forces each person to confront their own tendencies, their own biases about how they interpret incomplete information. The behind-the-scenes story also involves broader questions about how history is documented and preserved. How many other potentially significant discoveries have been lost simply because there were no adequate record-keeping systems? How many truths have been buried, not by deliberate conspiracy, but by negligence, disinterest, or the simple passage of time? The journey of trying to reconstruct events that happened more than a century ago, in remote regions, with sparse documentation, is a humbling lesson about the limitations of historical knowledge. And perhaps it is precisely this impossibility of a definitive resolution that keeps the story alive. If tomorrow irrefutable proof were to emerge that the mine never existed, or that it was discovered and operated secretly, something would be lost. The magic lies precisely in the gray area, in that space between the possible and the probable, between the documented and the forgotten. It is in this space that our imagination finds fertile ground, that personal revelations occur when each person decides for themselves what to believe. Did this mine really exist at some point in history, hidden beneath layers of ice and secrecy? Or do some stories remain alive through the centuries, precisely because they have never been fully explained, because they leave enough room for each generation to project onto them their own fears, hopes, and questions about human ambition and the limits of what we can truly know about the past? Write this down. Some truths we will never know. Look, if you've made it this far with me, you've already realized that this channel isn't about easy answers or spoon-fed stories. It's about truly diving into the mysteries that time has tried to erase, into the forgotten places of Canada that still hold secrets frozen among their ruins. If this type of content fascinates you, if you're one of those who can't stop thinking about these stories after the video ends, then subscribe to the channel now, because every week I bring you a new journey like this, exploring historical legends, ghost towns, abandoned hospitals, and the darkest and most haunted corners of this immense country. And leave a comment below saying, "I came all the way to the end." So I know you were really with me throughout this whole story. I read every comment, and I love knowing who the people are who share this obsession with real mysteries. If the video captivated you, if it made you question what really happened in those icy lands of the Yukon, click like. This shows that we created a real connection here, that this content is worthwhile and deserves to reach more people who think like you. And before you go, there's a video here that perfectly complements this topic, exploring another Canadian mystery that will send shivers down your spine just as much. Click and stay with me there, because the journey through the most haunted and forgotten places in Canada is only just beginning.